China launches cargo spacecraft and lands its Spaceplane, SpaceX plans to perform a double Droneship landing on an upcoming Falcon Heavy, and ULA rolls out its Vulcan rocket for final pre-launch testing. It's Friday the 12th of May, and there's much more to come this week in Spaceflight, sponsored by Pixel Starships. Hey everyone, I'm Elysia Segal for NSF, and welcome to This Week in Spaceflight, where we'll round up the latest news and launches that have happened during the week. China's Secretive spaceplane has come back to Earth this week after 276 days in orbit. The reusable spacecraft lifted off on August 4, 2022, on board a Changzhou 2F rocket, the same rocket that China uses to launch their Tianzhou crewed capsules. On its 9-month-long stay in orbit, the spaceplane conducted several major maneuvers, likely to test its orbital maneuvering capabilities. The spacecraft also appeared to test the release, capture, re-release, and recapture of a satellite companion that was stowed on board its payload bay during launch. This was the second mission of the spacecraft, following a much shorter 2-day trip to orbit in September of 2020, when it also released a satellite that was stowed in it. It's not fully known what the spacecraft looks like and what it was doing up in orbit, but photos of the rocket fairing that protected it during launch show protuberances that suggest it's similar in design to the US Space Force X-37B spaceplane. Very much like the X-37B, it also seems like the Chinese spaceplane, which we don't know its name yet, can remain in orbit for long periods of time. It'll be interesting to see if on later missions it's capable of surpassing the X-37B's 908-day record for longest stay in orbit. From an orbital spaceplane to a suborbital spaceplane, Virgin Galactic has announced it's resuming human spaceflight activity on its Spaceship Two spaceplane. After performing a captive flight test and a glide flight test of Spaceship Two last month, the company says it's ready to resume powered flights up to the edge of space and back in late May. The mission, called Unity 25, will carry 4 passengers, all Virgin Galactic employees, that will provide a final assessment before the company's first customer flight in late June. The spaceflight will feature 3 rookie travelers, Luke Mays, Jamila Gilbert, and Christopher Huey. The 4th passenger will be Beth Moses, who will be flying for a 3rd time on Spaceship Two. The commander will be Michael Masucci, and the pilot will be former Space Shuttle astronaut Frederick Sturkow. Both will also be flying for a 3rd time on Spaceship Two. If all goes well, the company plans to start customer flights about a month later in late June, with a flight cadence of roughly once a month. ULA's Vulcan rocket has rolled out to the pad for final pre-launch testing ahead of launch. The rocket rolled out on May 11th with both first and second stages, but without a fairing or payload. It'll perform a wet dress rehearsal on May 12th, when this video is released, so check out our Space Coast Live livestream for views of the test as it happens. During the rehearsal, both stages will be filled with propellants, and the rocket and pad systems will go through a countdown simulation just as if it were to launch. This will then be followed next week by a flight readiness firing, similar to the wet dress rehearsal, but at the end of the countdown, the 2 BE-4 engines on Vulcan will be ignited for a few seconds. If the tests are successful, Vulcan could be ready to launch as soon as this summer. Next up, we'll take a look at the launches we had this week. But before that, Ryan, I heard you found a new game, and it has starships?
Real-life starships may be grounded for a while, but one way you can continue to fly them is with Pixel Starships, the sponsor of today's video. In Pixel Starships, you get to design and manage your own starship, including this special design that was released to commemorate the maiden integrated flight test of the real-life thing, all whilst flying around a massive multiplayer online world that has over 8 million players. And with those other players, you can also trade or decide to battle. When the next Starship flight test comes around, you may find yourself tuned into our stream with not a lot going on in the early stages of the count, so why not keep yourself occupied on your PC? Pixel Starships is also available on mobile, so you can continue to command every aspect of your Starship, even on your daily commute, or whilst you're filming a video. Pixel Starships is continuously updated, giving you more content to battle with, and importantly, it's not pay to win. To get yourself a head start, download Pixel Starships from the link in the description and you'll get yourself 100 free Starbucks, the in-game currency, upon arrival. When you've signed up, enter this promo code and you'll bag yourself another 125 Starbucks. I'm going to try win some more battles, so let's get back on with the video.
Wait, 225 free Starbucks? That's a great way to get started. I'm gonna go download it as soon as I'm done recording this video. This week we had 3 launches, and each one came from different corners of the world. Rocket Lab launched the Rocket Like a Hurricane mission on May 8th at 1 o'clock UTC from Launch Complex 1B in New Zealand. The mission successfully placed 2 satellites for NASA's Tropics constellation. These weather satellites will be monitoring the temperature and humidity of the atmosphere in tropical areas of the world. By having multiple satellites instead of one, a given location can be revisited multiple times a day instead of just once a day, allowing for higher resolution in time of the changes in the atmosphere. NASA hopes this will increase understanding of the evolution of tropical cyclones, hence the funny name Rocket Lab gave to the mission. Another 2 Tropics satellites are set for launch later this month, coming to a storm near you. That's literally the name of the mission. China has launched their Tianzhou 6 cargo spacecraft to the Chinese space station. Liftoff occurred on May 10th at 13:22 UTC from the Wenchang Satellite Launch Center. This Tianzhou spacecraft debuted a new cargo rack configuration that will allow it to carry up to 7.4 tons of cargo in future missions. It also flew with improved antennas that allow higher data transfer rates between the spacecraft and the ground. The Tianzhou 6 spacecraft docked to the Chinese space station on May 10th at 21:16 UTC, almost 8 hours after launch, and it'll remain on the station until early next year. You know the deal. If there have been launches in the week, one of them has to be from SpaceX. A Falcon 9 rocket lifted off on May 10th at 20:09 UTC from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The Falcon 9 carried the latest batch of Starlink V1.5 satellites headed to Starlink's first-generation constellation. The first stage for the mission, B-1075, was flying for a 3rd time and successfully landed on the Droneship Of Course I Still Love You. The Starlink satellites deployed successfully 20 minutes after liftoff. With this launch, SpaceX has now launched 4,391 Starlink satellites, of which 4,074 remain in orbit, and of those, 3,427 satellites are in operational orbits. This week, VAST announced that it had selected SpaceX to launch their Haven 1 space station and a human spaceflight mission to that station. You probably haven't heard a lot about VAST, but they recently acquired a rocket company, Launcher, that was developing their own propulsion systems and even launched an orbital tug on a Falcon 9 rocket not long ago. The Haven 1 station that VAST is planning to build would be very simple in construction, with just a single module with propulsion and solar panels. It would be serving as more of an extension of SpaceX's Crew Dragon vehicle rather than a fully outfitted space station. The plan is to launch the station on a Falcon 9 in August of 2025, followed shortly thereafter by a crewed mission. Crew Dragon would remain docked to Haven 1 for about 30 days, and during its stay, the station's propulsion system would be used to spin it and create some small artificial gravity for the passengers. The station would also sport a cupola on one of its ends for viewing the Earth. VAST plans to develop a larger modular station in the future, sized for the payload volume of Starship. It certainly will be no small feat and will likely take a lot of time and money, so we'll have to keep a close eye on what happens with those plans. Last week, we also had news about the landing profile for the boosters of the next 2 Falcon Heavy missions, and one of them will be doing something that's never been done before. Earlier this week, SpaceX filed permits with the Federal Communications Commission to communicate before and during launch with the Falcon Heavy rocket and all its stages and boosters. Now, these permits are usual for all SpaceX launches, and while they are just more boring paperwork, they also allow us to gather some information about an upcoming mission. These 2 upcoming Falcon Heavy launches are the USSF-52 and EchoStar 24 missions. According to these permits, both missions will feature an expendable center core, while the boosters will land and be recovered. For USSF-52, it'll be just like 5 of the 6 Falcon Heavy missions so far. They'll separate, turn back, and land back on land at Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2. However, for EchoStar 24, this will be the first time both boosters will land on drone ships. After booster separation, they'll reorient engines first and go through entry, but they will not be performing a boost back burn to return all the way to land. Instead, they'll land on 2 drone ships. The reason why this will happen is because the EchoStar 24 satellite is very heavy. It's actually going to be the heaviest geostationary communication satellite ever launched at over 9 tons in mass. It's also going close to geostationary orbit, so not only is it heavy, it's also going to a high-energy orbit. This means that for the rocket to put it into that final orbit, it needs the extra push. So instead of the side boosters coming back to land, they'll have to land on drone ships. The USS F-52 mission is currently set for July 7th, while the EchoStar 24 mission is set for no earlier than August of this year. Hopefully we get to see some great shots of that double drone ship landing. What do you think? Should SpaceX have a drone or a helicopter out there taking shots? Let us know in the comments. And here's what we have coming up for next week. Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petelin will perform a spacewalk on the International Space Station to deploy and activate a newly installed radiator on Naoka. The spacewalk is set to occur on May 12th, starting at 15:55 UTC, and should last about 7 hours. Last week, SpaceX was targeting a Starlink doubleheader with Starlink Group 29 and Starlink Group 59 missions. However, that last one got delayed. Starlink Group 59 is now scheduled to launch on May 14th within a 3-hour, 53-minute window, opening at 4:48 UTC from Florida. It's unlikely to happen, but SpaceX also plans another Starlink mission, Starlink Group 63, from that same pad about 4 days later on May 18th. This would break a record turnaround time for the launch pad if they do both missions without a delay, so good luck to them. And that's your weekly update of all things spaceflight. Thanks again to Pixel Starships for sponsoring this video. Be sure to download Pixel Starships using the link below and use promo code NSF125 to get your bonus 125 Starbucks. We'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.